That pop-punk explosion of the early 2000s was something special. With Blink-182, Sum 41, and Fall Out Boy, the genre took on the mainstream in its own game, scoring hit after hit while staying true to the snarky, raw-edged sound of punk rock. But what if I told you that entire scene was built on a band that most kids simply ignore these days? Hear me out. I'm talking about The Offspring, the band that didn't just influence pop-punk, they created its late 90s sound. With punk energy, massive hooks, and sarcastic humor, they laid the blueprint for the bands that would follow. But once the 1990s rolled into the early 2000s, the band found themselves on the outside looking in. They just never got the respect they deserved. So what happened? Did they miss their moment? Or were they just never meant to be a part of the scene they helped to build? The Offspring are considered 90s pop-punk stalwarts, but their story begins way back in the 1980s. Somewhere in Cypress, California in 1984, two guys heard a TSOL record at a party and decided to form a band. Those guys were Gregory Greg K. Kriesel and Brian Dexter Holland. And the band was called, the band was called Manic Subsidal back then. Bringing in James Lilja on drums and Kevin Noodles Wasserman on guitar, Manic Subsidal had their first lineup. They also had a few songs too, and they needed somewhere to perform them. So they drove to Santa Cruz and opened for the bands White Flag and Scared Straight. This was the first of many shows over the coming years. After a name change in 1986, the band became The Offspring. Lilja left to go to med school, and in came Ron Welty on drums. That classic Offspring lineup was together for the first time. The self-released single I'll Be Waiting got the band signed to Nemesis Records, who released their self-titled album in 1989. This became the launchpad that got them snapped up by Epitaph, and second album Ignition followed in 1992. So far, it's a familiar tale of a hardworking band trying to make their own way in the world. But the next few albums were going to change everything. This is where we're going to see those pop-punk foundations getting laid down, that special formula concocting some magic. But what was this formula exactly? Well, first off, there's speed. Speed is all over 1994's breakthrough record Smash, the second record on Epitaph. From the breakneck buzzsaw guitars of Nitro, Youth Energy, to the barreling, uncompromising title track, the record rips through 14 songs in double-quick time. There are slow moments, down-tempo moments, but the overall vibe of the record is fast, fast, fast. And what else? Well, melody. Raucous, abrasive hardcore had been done. That was more of a Black Flag, Minor Threat kind of thing. In the mid-90s, the new punk rockers were all about catchiness. Again, there's plenty of melody on Smash, the intriguing Middle Eastern-sounding groove on Come Out and Play, the ska-tinged bounciness of What Happened to You. There are parts of this album that are going to stay in your head for days. And two more ingredients: attitude and humor. Every track on Smash is dripping with attitude, peaking on songs like Genocide and Not the One. This record didn't dial up the humor like later records would, but it's still there. The self-deprecating, loser core of self-esteem is a good example. But if we take Bad Habit at face value, it's pretty disturbing. So let's say the guys were just joking around with this one too. The formula was set. The Offspring had laid down one of the defining records in pop-punk history, and the sky was the limit for the four guys from California. But where would they go from here? Smash was a really big deal for The Offspring. A mainstream chart success, it turned the band from hopeful part-timers into real rock stars. It also won big acclaim. It's one of the best pop-punk albums of all time, no doubt about that. So now, they set to work on perfecting their formula. 1997's Ixnay on the Hombre is a solid follow-up to Smash. The Meaning of Life is one of the thrashiest tracks The Offspring had recorded to date, while Cool to Hate's Whoa 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 chorus is catchy as hell. All I Want obnoxious yeah 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 refrain has an attitude all its own, although the whole record is pretty attitude-driven to be honest. And there's slices of dark, sometimes bawdy humor here and there too, like on Me and My Old Lady. It was another hit and another critical success, but maybe the guys were thinking about tweaking the formula a little bit. Maybe they were worried it wasn't quite right. The balance wasn't quite there. For the next record, 1998's major label debut, the Columbia released Americana. They came back with a whole new take on the formula. A week before the album was released in November 1998, the band released a single, Pretty Fly for a White Guy. The guys really leaned into the comedy on this one. The social commentary about white dudes appropriating black culture is delivered with layers of satire and silliness, and audiences loved it. The single went to #1 all over the world and laid the groundwork for what was to follow on the record. Tracks like Why Don't You Get a Job and Walla Walla offer more the same. Social commentary, heavy on the comedy. But let's not forget, this is only part of the formula. The Offspring might have sacrificed a bit of speed for the laughs, but there's still plenty of thrashy intensity on songs like Staring at the Sun. There's even a track called No Breaks. And melody? Well, that's everywhere. The Offspring were becoming real hook writers, without sacrificing any of their punk credentials. And that leaves us with attitude. Americana is a record with bags of attitude. But sometimes that attitude hits a little different. Take The Kids Aren't Alright, for example. It's a super angry track about so many kids who just never had a chance, so much potential just thrown away. But it's delivered with a kind of melancholy we haven't really seen from the Offspring before. And it's one of their best ever tracks as a result. Now, most of you are probably going to say that Smash is the better record, and you could be right. But with Americana, Offspring really perfected the formula they'd been working on in the lab since the late 80s. And it made them global phenomenons, not just in the punk world, but in the whole world. So that formula was perfect. It didn't need tweaking. So guess what Offspring did? They didn't tweak it. 2000's Conspiracy of One feels a bit like Americana Part 2. Come Out Swinging comes out, well, swinging. The galloping drum beat and trademark thrash guitar is a great introduction to the record. Next up, Original Prankster. Offspring breathed new life into the Pretty Fly blueprint with this one, turning up the comedy and even dropping a reference to Rob Schneider's character from The Waterboy, with the repeated "You Can Do It" line. Want You Bad is basically a pop song, wrapped in punk rock clothing and with the tempo jacked up. Nothing wrong with that. There's a tinge of sadness to Million Miles Away, moody aggression on Vultures, and some classic groovy guitar on Living in Chaos. Anyway, you get the point. Offspring weren't out to reinvent the wheel with Conspiracy. They didn't need to. They could just remake Americana, and why the hell not? They left us wanting more in 1998. In 2000, they gave us more. And it was another massive hit. The album sold a ton of copies worldwide, and singles like Want You Bad and Original Prankster were all over the charts. But something had happened. The bratty punk kids weren't exactly kids anymore. Dexter Holland was 35. Noodles was 37. Less than a year younger than Brett Gurewitz of Bad Religion, and literally 5 weeks younger than the Descendants' Milo Aukerman, who kind of feel like a whole different generation. They'd sort of become the elder statesmen of the scene, without even realizing it. Bands like Sum 41, Blink-182, Less Than Jake, and others were taking that formula and making it their own. Maybe the Offspring had never set out to be scene leaders, but they were. In fact, they were more than this. They were scene creators. But the Offspring had now made almost the same record twice in a row. Great records, no doubt, but not much evolution going on here. If they wanted to retain their crown at the top of the pile, they might need to do something different. And if they weren't going to change, the scene might just change for them. The Offspring spent the first 2 years of the new millennium touring hard, and only started writing their new record late in 2002. But they were dealt a blow almost immediately when Ron Welty left the band. The first personnel change in more than 15 years brought the classic Offspring lineup to an end. Welty would later try to sue his former friends for unpaid royalties, a sad footnote to those golden years. Whether Welty's departure rocked the band or not, we can't say. But most agree that Splinter, the first record without the former drummer, is one of the Offspring's weakest releases. It all comes down to that formula yet again. There's just not as much attitude and anger. The jokes in satirical tracks like Hit That just don't land so well. And the whole thing is less thrashy, less punky, and less catchy. It's just less Offspringy, to be honest. But by this point, the band were fully fledged rock stars. They could have recorded an album of balalaika instrumentals and it would have flown off the shelves. So the band had another hit, but where did this leave them with punk fans? It didn't go down so well. Splinter was the Offspring's third attempt releasing Americana. The thing is, like many third acts in a trilogy, it's just not as good. And fans who were wanting more in '98 had already got what they wanted in 2000. So the Offspring had broken the golden rule. They'd left fans wanting less. And even worse, they drifted into self-parody. The bleepy synth line on Hit That, for example, might have been another attempt at cross-genre innovation, like working with rapper Redman on Original Prankster, or the Give It To Me Baby vocals on Pretty Fly. But it just comes across as, well, a little lame. Sure, tracks like Dahui are still pretty cool, showing off what made Offspring so great in the first place. But it's buried all the way in the back of the album, track 11, and by this point, the damage has been done. For many, this is the end of the Offspring story. Bands are allowed a dud record here and there, especially after a string of classics. But Splinter came at the wrong time for the Offspring. The scene had changed. Pop punk of 2003 was way different to pop punk 1993, or even 1999. It was more emo-influenced, less about snarky humor and more about emotion and feelings. The Offspring were never going to make an emo record, but they at least needed to make a great record that reminded everyone what they were all about. They didn't do that. And so, scene kids turned to drive-thru and vagrant bands, away from the former pop-punk kings. But in fact, this is not the end of the story. 5 years later, they returned with their 8th album, Rise and Fall, Rage and Grace. It's not a classic record, but it's definitely something close to a return to form after Splinter. Lead single Hammerhead is spiky, political, punky, and full of old-school Offspring bite. The album sold fairly well, enough to keep them on Columbia Records at least. They might not have been a cool band anymore, but they were still stadium fillers and unit shifters. 4 years later, they were back again with Days Go By. After recording 2 albums without a full-time drummer, they finally had one in Pete Parada, and the new lineup produced an LP that some people loved and many people hated. The title track is a slice of Tom Petty-esque heartland rock, done the Offspring way, and it's sort of okay. Cruising California, with its part-sung, part-rapped verses, on the other hand, is probably best forgotten. In the 9 albumless years that followed, the band went through some big changes. Original member Greg Kay left in 2018, after business disputes with the rest of the group. Todd Morse of legendary melodic hardcore band H2O joined in his place. The deal with Columbia came to an end. The Offspring were left without a label for the first time in 2 decades. Still, the band was big enough to land a deal with Concord. Their first record with the new label, Let the Bad Times Roll, was also their last with Pete Parada, who left after a dispute over the COVID vaccine. I'd love to tell you it's a stunning return to the glory days, but it's not. At least, not really. The band are obviously still really good songwriters. They just can't quite recapture that old magic. In 2024, the Offspring released their second Concord record, with new drummer Brandon Pertzborn, who played with everyone from Black Flag and Suicidal Tendencies to Marilyn Manson. And, as you might expect, Supercharged has its moments. Make It All Right is nice summery pop punk. Come to Brazil strays into soaring stadium rock here and there, but it's mostly okay. Still, it's very much a later Offspring album, and so not in the same class as those early releases. The Offspring still deservedly pack out venues right across the world. But I can't help but think those sellout crowds emit a faint sigh when Dexter says, "Here's one off the last record," rather than, "This one's an old one. It's called Genocide." Approaching the Offspring's legacy in 2025 is a bit awkward. On the one hand, they are deservedly one of the biggest pop-punk bands of all time. Smash, Ixnay, and Americana are basically flawless. And I think we can include self-titled Ignition and Conspiracy as top-tier records. But it's now been a quarter of a century since the Offspring hit those heights. Taste is subjective, I get that. And there are good songs on the last 4 or 5 albums. But most would agree that the band are way past their best. So let's narrow things down to that first decade and a half. Remember, this was the decade in which the Offspring came up with their winning formula for god-level pop-punk, and basically created the bratty, snarky, catchy scene that sprung up around the end of the 1990s. So why don't the Offspring get credit for this? What they did was amazing. Well, firstly, they sort of do. Smash still makes lists of the best punk records of all time, and Americana is cited as influential by plenty of bands. So I guess the question is, why don't they get more credit? Why aren't they more respected? It could be a matter of those later records watering down their legacy. Bands like Blink-182 and NoFX can get very, very silly at times, but they don't release wonky synth rock tracks like Hit That. Bands like Sum 41 love their fun, throwaway songs, but they don't make tepid tracks like Cruising California. I feel like the live appeal of tracks as savage as Come Out and Play, or as heartrending as The Kids Aren't All Right, must lose their edge a bit when you know, in a few songs' time, Dexter is going to be singing lines like, "Cruisin', bumpin', my Huntington Beach. 'Cause the sun will shine, we have a good time." It might also be a matter of timing. 2003 was a real turning point in pop punk, with the emo side of the genre very much coming to the fore. The Offspring stuck to their guns, which is fine. But if you were gonna make an Offspring record in 2003, you'd better make sure it's a good one. And Splinter is not a good Offspring record. Making that misstep and then taking 5 years to release the next record really killed off their momentum. Oh, and on the subject of sticking to their guns, that could be an issue as well. The Offspring just ignored the changing taste in the scene. While Blink-182 and Sum 41 were increasingly influenced by emo and post-hardcore, the Offspring took one look at that and said, no thanks. And again, that's fine. They were staying true to themselves. And it's not like staying true to themselves hasn't sold records. They signed to a major in 1996, and they're still on a major now, almost 30 years later. It's just that it's hard to square the mind-blowing impact of those early records with the relative mediocrity of the later releases. So the Offspring's legacy is strong, and they deserve all the love, credit, respect, and adulation in the world. It's just easier if we pretend their timeline stopped in 2000. But maybe I'm wrong. What do you think? Maybe you love the Offspring, and your favorite records are the most recent ones. Or maybe you think I'm being too generous. You love Smash, and that's it. Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe, and stay right where you are for more pop punk awesomeness in just a sec.